So there are stereotypes, lots of them. And if we were in a more intimate setting, I might invite you to share some. But there are stereotypes about gender, right? Who are good drivers? Who are not good drivers? About race, about nationality. For example, people are always like, you're Mexican? You don't have an accent. Well, you can be Mexican and not have an accent and speak English, right? But there's like a stereotype of a foreigner with an accent. Language, right? If you speak a foreign language, what does that mean? Disability, lots of stereotypes, right, about sort of ability or inability for individuals who have disabilities. And then, of course, lots of stereotypes about sexual identity, okay? And again, they are part of what forms how we view the world. And they create some of the disparities, and there's, some very strong science that points to bias leading to disparities in health, disparities in education, disparities in the criminal justice system. For example, African Americans, and in some cases Hispanics, are less likely to receive appropriate cardiac medication or to undergo coronary artery bypass surgery. I'm doing some training right now at UMass Memorial at the medical school with learners. And what they say is like, I'm sure that I am not intentionally making a decision to provide worse care to my African American or to my Latino patients. And I think probably most of the time that's correct. They're not doing it intentionally. But something about the person, the patient in front of you, and if you look at the numbers, this stuff is happening overwhelmingly across the country. Something is happening, right? And so it's really great that the medical school is thinking about how to help their learners understand what their biases are and to think about how to sort of bring a different self into the exam room so that hopefully they're controlling the bias that we all have. And I believe that there's sort of also strong indication that this happens in education. And we know from thinking about the school to prison pipeline, right, that this stuff is happening to our youth and to the young adults who you are seeing coming here as students, right, who may not be as prepared as others or who may be bringing sort of trauma or other stress into the classroom. And you are trying really hard to teach them. And it can be a challenge, but it's important to understand sort of who we are, who we're going into the room with our students with, and how to control for the bias that we each have. And that's again why I encourage you, and I'm glad that QCC is starting to have these conversations to help the faculty and the staff be as prepared as possible to deal successfully with the diverse populations that we work with. All right, so I know you feel bad, or maybe somebody in this room feels bad. I know when I first took the implicit association test and saw my results, which showed that I had bias against several groups of people, including Latino men, so that's sort of like my people, I felt bad, like you feel guilt, right? Because you think that means that you were a bad person. But if we can remember that we are all human, we all have bias, okay? And so we shouldn't feel guilty about it. What we can do is figure out what bias we have and then do something to manage that we have that bias. I think the problem arises where we want to deny that it is happening. And then that is where we can get ourselves into trouble. I also want to speak very, very briefly about color blindness. So one solution, not a solution, that some good people make is that they want to say, well, I don't see color. Like, I don't see that the two of you are different. Well, actually, unless you're actually colorblind, you do see difference, right? And if I deny that I see the color of your skin, first of all, the person that I'm looking at is like, what is wrong with you? Like, really? You don't see? Like, yes, I have skin color. And so color blindness is dangerous for lots of reasons, but it doesn't engender trust, because if the person that you're speaking to knows that they have a different race or a different ethnicity, which is visible, and you're trying to pretend it's not there, that is a problem. And so I think what people are trying to say is, I really hope that I'm not treating you differently because of the color of your skin, or because of where you're from, or because of your ethnicity. But to pretend that you don't see color is very, very problematic. All right, so I want you each to think of a stereotype in your head, a racial or an ethnic stereotype. And then I'm going to come back to that, but I just want you to sort of remember that thought. All right. So communication is really, really important. Now, that said, you should not ask every question that comes to your head about the group that is different to yours. I've gotten some crazy, crazy questions in my life, and occasionally just been like, oh my God, like, I can't believe they just said that. And so, communication is important, and inquiry is important, but you want to be thoughtful and careful about sort of how you go about asking those questions. I was once flying into Switzerland and on my Mexican passport, because I still was not an American citizen. My husband, who's American, blonde and blue-eyed, had already gone ahead. And the guy saw my Mexican passport and asked me if I had enough money for my trip. And if he had not been the immigration guy, I might have acted more aggressively, but of course, when you don't have power, you just, you're polite. But like, how offensive is that, right? What's behind that, right? That all Mexicans are poor. And actually, that's not my experience. I'm an extraordinarily privileged Mexican, not from like the super elite, because one of the richest men in the world is Mexican. I'm not in that category. But I went to the British high school, lived in one of the nicest neighborhoods in Mexico City. That's why I'm not that stereotype. And so stereotypes are problematic. And so learn and communicate and try to gain more knowledge, but be careful in how you do it. All right, so on the news right now, people are hearing lots of things describing Mexicans in ways that I personally find pretty offensive. And I actually was at the beach the other day with a good friend of mine, and they had played categories the night before, and Mexico had come up as a category, and her 18-year-old daughter, the word that came to mind was penis. Right? So why is that? Because stuff is happening with immigrant children, right, who are being described as being Mexican. And so I like this slide, because this is an alternative to that stereotype of a Mexican. These are actually beautiful parts of Mexico that are not sort of what we're hearing about. And so seeing people differently, seeing places differently to how they're being described is really, really important, so that we're seeing a fuller picture. So I don't know if any of you know Chimamanda Adichie. Phenomenal author, yes. You should read her work if you haven't. She gave a remarkable TED Talk, which is called The Danger of a Single Story. Who has heard it? Okay, excellent. I'm glad you did. So her TED Talk is phenomenal. It's only 18 minutes long, and you can play sort of an 11-minute version. But she talks about the danger of the single story, and the danger of, only seeing somebody one way, and then that becomes sort of what that person or what that culture is for you, and just how problematic that is. One of the things I really like about her TED Talk is she acknowledges her own bias, right, at seeing people from her country that were poor in one way. And then having the experience of coming as an immigrant to college in the United States, and then sort of being seen as this African, which she did not identify as, right, because she was from a country within Africa. And then just what people thought of Africa, right? Either sort of animals, right, or poverty and ineffective government, right? And if that's all that you think Africa is, you're missing something huge. The same thing with Mexico, right? It's a beautiful, beautiful country. There are people who look very different. The regions are very different. The food is very different depending on where you go. You don't eat hard-shell tacos. And if you only see one thing, you are missing something. And there's also, I think, for me, and I was just there last month, a lot of my friends were like, how can you still be living there? Like, you need to come home. And they have this picture of America as this one thing, right? Because the news in Mexico, you might imagine, is a little bit different. And so I found myself actually sort of defending this country and the very good people who I live with and work with and am friends with, right? And so there's a danger to seeing only a single story. And so I urge you, as you think about the student populations that you're working with, to understand the different cultures of the populations that you are serving, but also to see that individual learner in front of you and how they are unique and special and different. And that they may not fit in whatever stereotype you might have of them, or that our society at large might have of them. All right, so understanding difference. So I love these two sayings: the fool speaks and the wise man listens. It takes 2 years to learn to talk and 70 to learn how to hush up. So who are your students? This is probably not new to you, but I was actually pleased. You have some nice diversity. You still have, a lot of white students, but that reflects sort of the demographics of Worcester County. But around 12% Black students, a little bit less than 20% Hispanic students, and maybe like 5 or 6 Asian students. And then your graduation rate, it's actually pretty close. There are a few places where there's some difference. But get to know your student communities, and what their needs are. But also not what their needs are, but the value that they can bring to your classroom, to your community. I really think that the immigrants in Worcester are sort of one of our greatest strengths. And we have a lot of historic immigrant communities in Worcester, like the Irish and the Italians, and others, and there's richness from those communities, but there are also new immigrant communities who also bring an amazing sort of depth of perspective and a culture, and so really get to know those communities. All right, so I'm going to end pretty quickly with how you do some of this learning that I encourage you to do. So I want to start by asking you to think about, like, who is your personal community and what does that community look like? And if it looks mostly like how you look, think about how you could broaden your circle. How can you get to know somebody of a different culture? How can you get to know somebody that's going to teach you something, and that you might also teach something too? And so grow those networks. That's really the best way to do the learning that you want to do. Approach others with humility. So what does that mean? Don't sort of assume that you understand their ethnicity, their race, their culture, but approach humbly in the same way that you want them to approach you humbly, right? Worcester, I love the city. We sometimes have like inferiority issues, right, with Boston, or we feel like people are like, oh, Worcester, right? And so in the same way that you don't want your beautiful community to be sort of looked at in that way, be humble in how you get to know others. Really, really important. And then I want to end with this. So because we are different and we come from different places, we experience dignity and respect differently. And so you might have a learner who is behaving in a way that is surprising to you. Assume goodness. Assume that there's a reason why there might be a difference. And try to figure out how you can engage with them sort of as a teacher to learner in a respectful way that is going to make them feel respected, because that's so, so very important. And if somebody does something to you and you feel disrespected, assume good intent, because if it's an intercultural communication, it's possible that something is happening unintentionally that is causing harm. And so engaging in dialogue about what's happening is really important, but doing it from a from a humble viewpoint, I think, is extraordinarily important. Now, that said, if you face what is more overt racism, the instructions are different, right? But if it's about sort of misunderstanding, be patient, right? Again, last time I'll talk about our trip to Mexico. So we hug and kiss in Mexico like crazy. When my husband and I got married, and we got married in Mexico, my father-in-law said to everybody, like, don't touch me, right? Because in his culture, you don't touch, and in my culture, we touch a ton. My daughter, just spent 3 weeks hugging and kissing everybody she saw. And, we kiss family, we kiss people we don't know, we kiss people who we meet through a friend. That's just how our culture is. My daughter came back, went to see her doctor, who we've known for such a long time, and she hugged her, and then was like, oh my gosh, that was socially awkward, why did I do that? She has a kind doctor who was like, oh, it's okay, it's so good to see you. But we make mistakes, right? Because of who we are and where we've come from. And so be patient with each other, right? When those kinds of things happen. And then learn from them, right? Really, really important. So dignity and humility are really, really important. And then I'm going to end just with this slide, which hopefully revisits sort of your organizational mission. Be open. This is a new academic year. It's really exciting to be with you on this opening day. And ignite your own learning about these things. I can assure you that your life experience is going to be so much greater if you can. And the opportunities that you will be able to create for your learners and for you and your colleagues will just be immense. So thank you for your time, and good luck. So I have a few minutes to take questions or comments. Anybody have something they want to ask or share? And I will say I am the person who could ask a question, but you might be scared to ask somebody else. Yes. So the question is, what is one of the first worst examples of stereotyping over the past few years? I mean, the one that hurts me the most, and I didn't talk about this, sort of microaggression. So I will say that until very recently, I, as a Mexican in the United States, never felt scared. But I will say that over the past few years, when Mexicans were started to be described, right, as rapists and murderers, I mean, that is just horrible, right? And so that's sort of a negative stereotype, but then just imagine, right? It's like on the news every day, and then people repeat it, and even if you disagree with it, it's like entering your brain. And every time I hear it, I feel like my soul gets crushed just tiny little bit, right? But I think the stereotype of sort of a black man in a hoodie, I mean, is a horrible stereotype that sometimes isn't spoken, right, but is seen. And it makes us fear, right? And I think those things are extraordinarily dangerous. I will say for the very first time coming back into this country, I was scared. Well, I should say my children were scared because I was asked sort of about my Mexican origin, which has never happened before. And I've been a citizen now for over a decade. And so I think those kinds of things are very dangerous. Now, I'm speaking to sort of my personal experience. I think it's a tough question because, the stereotypes affect us differently based on what group you're in. And so I am not African American and I'm not a man. stereotypes for that community are extraordinarily painful and hurtful. And so I think it's complicated, and they affect many of us. And I think they also affect friends. You know, my husband, who's an Irish Catholic guy, right? He feels the hurt that I feel. And I think, you know, most of us do. But I think they hurt our society at large, all of them. Other questions, thoughts? Yes, I see a hand back.
Yes, Cornel West once said, race matters, and he made a pretty good argument for it. Now, in what you do, if I understand you correctly, you do some training in this area. So with the groups that you work with, and I'm talking about prognosis, what do you see on the horizon? As an African-American male at 70 years old, I've seen race come and go, and it's still part of the American fabric. However, do you, and I'm assuming you're somewhat younger, in the training that you do, in the training that you do, in the groups that you meet, do you sense any kind of positivity, even in the milieu that we're in, from the country standpoint, how it's being talked about? Do you see maybe the whole issue of race changing with the next 2 or 3 generations coming on, maybe your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, of all of us? How do you think people are thinking about this in terms of the future?
Yeah, so that's a great question, thank you. So I actually feel quite optimistic. And the reason that I say that is that I would say that probably over the last 6 months, I've trained 500 or so people, and have been approached by sort of increasingly different groups of organizations who want to have these conversations. And so I think even though there's a lot of painful rhetoric out there, I think more and more people want to talk about this, more and more people want to think about how we are each a part of the solution. And I'll share sort of a short story, which is what really gives me hope about my daughter, Anna. She's 14, freshman this year. And we live in a small town in central Massachusetts, and she passes for white and a little bit lighter than me. And until probably last year, she never had to identify as anything, right? And that's the privilege of being white, right? You're the majority, and so people don't necessarily you don't have to live, your racial or ethnic sort of presence all of the time. And so she was, we talk about Mexico all the time, we speak Spanish in the house, and so she was never ashamed of being a Mexican, but she has started to embrace her ethnicity and to speak about it, in part because she wants to, and she's, one of the top students in her class, a really good girl. She wants to share who she is as sort of an alternative stereotype, right, to what, and she could have done the opposite, because she could have pretended that she was white and not stood up when she heard things. And I don't, I talk about my work, but I try not to talk too much about it. And that really came from her and her friends. And so I think it's that inspiration in our youth who really see the world differently than we did that gives me the most hope. And as I've had conversations, particularly in the workforce with sort of 20-somethings, folks are having those conversations, and so that gives me a lot of hope. So thank you for your question. One more maybe, and then I think we'll end. Yes. Absolutely.
So, I have younger children, and recently had a conversation about how their impact them. So, they're 10 and 11, and we were coming and going to school, and my kids were like, my friend so-and-so, and, and I like her, and blah, 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 and they're just talking about, and there's this they are the first generation that race doesn't matter. And where race matters so much, when I find it very difficult to sort of walk that line, because you don't want race to matter, right? But it does. What steps did you have?
So I think amongst the very young and kids, elementary school, I think, what you're describing is sort of that colorblind paradise that we want to live in. And so I think the wish there, right, and I think what they're projecting is like, these are my two best friends and they look different to me and it doesn't matter, right? And so I think the purity of that is beautiful. I think the problem is that we then enter sort of the greater society where race still matters. And I would say that even at a high school level, race is present. And if you think about African American communities and policing of youth, like it matters. And so I think, I want to sort of blend the optimism that our youth have with the reality that it still does and that we have to talk about it. And I also think we can't forget the very troubled history that exists in our country. And so talking about it is important, because we shouldn't forget. But there are very important conversations to have with your children and to be done with love, right? Because I think what they're expressing comes from a very good place and is probably true for them, but their experience might change over time. So thank you. I know Louise wants to move on with the agenda, but I really appreciate your time and just wish you an amazing year with your learners. Thank you.
Well, thank you for those remarks and for those thought-provoking meetings, etc. It gives us an opportunity to begin the year from a perspective and with a perception or a perspective of how we will approach this year and how we perhaps can get from us and them to becoming an entire team where we're all in it together and we become a we. So thank you. You have a break at this point in the program, so you're welcome to go out, try out the furniture, enjoy the refreshments, and we'll